What's up, everyone? I'm out driving Mac today. You know, I put about 1,500 miles on these front Bilstein shocks, and I think they suck. Man. Eh. A few weeks ago, my wife was in the car, and we were just going around town, and she's like, "Why is it so rough, and why is it so bouncy?" I mean, what do you say? It's supposed to be a performance car, but it's also a high-end car. And if it rides like a train or a truck, then that takes a lot of the appeal away. Oh, jeez. That's like 30, 40 miles an hour. Should be enjoyable for long trips and have performance on the track. And so that's what I'm after. This isn't it. I mean, I could tell her, hey, honey, you need to gain some more weight because it'll ride a lot smoother if you're heavier. Or I could say, would you mind, riding in the trunk because we need a little bit more weight. I got a full tank of gas, but that's not enough. Just squeeze up there. I'll see if it's better. I can't endure it anymore. Just kidding. I'm not mad at Bilstein at all. Bilsteins were original equipment on these cars for much heavier cars. So part of the problem is it's my fault. I have a very light car. The front of this car only weighs like 740 pounds. And the whole car weighs 1875. The front of the car is steel, but it's got a fiberglass bumper. Basically the whole front of it's been deleted, stripped out, whatever. The fuel filler, a bunch of weight's been stripped out. So if your car has heavier torsion bars, or if it's a heavier car, then the Bilsteins are much more suited to that. This hasn't been installed very long, so it's going to be pretty easy to break it all apart. Strip in a little. The barbecue skewer. We'll clean that up with some brake cleaner in a minute. Probably should have taken this off first. There we go. One thing to notice is this is automatically pushing itself down. That's not due to gravity, that's due to the gas pressure in the shock. Oops, got it. Remember in a previous video, we went through the travel lengths and ended up cutting down the bump rubbers to get full suspension travel. So I know that the shock itself is not bottoming out. This is the Bilstein B6 insert for the Bilstein cartridge or spindles. That's what I just took off. It used to be that they had a heavy duty and a sport version, and this was OEM equipment back in the day. Then Bilstein's changed it to B6 and B8, and it's always been confusing. It turns out that the heavy duty is not heavier than the sport. The sport is actually the heaviest. So I bought the heavy duty hoping it was going to be light enough for my car. The spring rates on the car are, it's the stock 19mm torsion bars or 18.9 or whatever the stock ones are. And I like that for a lightweight car. It doesn't need to have a stronger torsion bar if you've removed weight. So the stiffness is actually high just with the stock bar. And then if you add this, it has a certain amount of gas pressure in there. It almost doubles the spring rate because there's so much gas inside, I can barely get it to move. That affects the ride height and the spring rate. And then I've also made some adjustments or measurements of the suspension arms. So I have the Rebel Racing hard bushings, and that eliminates some of the spring rate because the suspension arms are very free to move. They just kind of fall down on their own weight. So you have three things that contribute to the spring rate. You have the actual torsion bar, which is like 100, 120 pounds per inch wheel rate. So that's every time you move it an inch, it creates about 120 pounds. Then you have the suspension bushings, like on my car that's been eliminated, but that accounts for almost 30 pounds because those donuts, the rubber donuts, they actually shear. And every time they displace at a certain angle, it creates more force. And so I calculated like 30 pounds. Actually, I measured that, 30 pounds per inch of wheel rate. So now you're up to like 150 pounds per inch. And then you have almost, I measured this too, you can easily get to another 150 pounds per inch. So every time your wheel has to travel, you know, an inch, you're creating hundreds and hundreds of pounds of force. And that's what I'm feeling in the car, which I think is over the top. That doesn't even account for the damping rates. I think this is way over damped for something that's as light as my car. So this is the new Koni insert, and I went for the Koni Reds. This is called the Koni Classic. It's the actual softer of the two Konis. Koni makes, I think, a yellow, which is slightly stiffer. But like for all the reasons I said before, I want to go with the softer one. So if I, push down on both of these kind of equally, I mean, look how much different. The Koni is so easy to move and it doesn't shoot back on its own. There's no pressure inside. So, to get these to move the same, it's pretty much impossible. So I'm gonna do that again, same pressure on both. I can't even move the Bilstein, so yeah. It is like at least a factor of 2 difference. These are remarkably different than the Bilstein, and that's just gonna basically allow my suspension to move when I hit a bump, and then I can adjust the rebound. The reason for the gas is because when this cycles up and down really quickly, the piston has these little holes in it and little parts of the valves where the fluid has to get past it. And sometimes you create a low pressure and you create bubbles within the shock fluid inside. It's just an oil. The higher the pressure in the shock, the less likely it is for those bubbles to be generated, or at least they convert back to a liquid like the oil. And so you get a more stable suspension, especially if you're doing heavy duty stuff, on a track, if you're doing endurance racing, you're off-road, and you put a lot of heat into these things and you get a lot of cycles, well, you don't want them to change as you drive your car. So the gas pressure is there to mitigate that. The Konis don't use gas pressure, which is something that I actually like because it's not going to contribute to the spring rate because there's no gas in it at all. And then it does get a little bit of, air inside. But unless you're doing, like I said, endurance racing, or you have real high energy impacts and unloading, I don't think that it's going to be that big of a deal for the driving that I do. It took me a long time to figure out how these things are adjustable. Here's the instructions.
We basically got a bunch of pictures here. It kind of shows a vague tool here, adjusting this on the top. There's a knob, which I never got. Basically, these instructions make no sense. And when you look at the shock, I kind of thought there might be something here under the cap. You know, looks like a red cap, but that's just red paint. It's all solid. That's a solid shaft. So you don't adjust it that way. This collar on here sort of moves, but that's not the adjustment either. And then the bottom of it is really just a solid pin on the bottom. So here's how you do it. There's a pin down at the bottom of the shock, and it engages a slot in the internal piston here. So if you push it all the way down, nice and soft, and rotate it just a little bit, you can feel the pin engage the piston. So right there, it's engaged. And so if I turn it all the way counterclockwise, that's the loosest setting. So right there, it's the loosest setting. I'm going to put a mark that corresponds with this notch in the strut top with the body here, and that'll give me some reference. So right there. And then I'm going to put one on top too, because once it's installed, this may be hard to see. When you turn it like this now, it won't affect the piston because it's not engaged with the pin. So that's how you adjust it. It's got a lot more force in now rebound than it does in compression. So when I hit a bump, it's going to compress, and then it's going to slowly return back. And so that's the dampening we're trying to tune. And also, like on cornering, you can kind of delay when the car rolls back to normal position. These Konis will not go with the Bilsteins. They don't fit. So these are the spindles or the strut housings that the Konis will fit. These are the Boge or Boge, I don't know how you want to say it, but these I got from Shane in the same lot of parts that my engine came from. So these fit the other way. These go in this direction. Drop in there like that, and then the stock nut basically just holds them in place. Now I hate to use this wrench on here, but I don't have the correct spanner and I don't feel like making a new one. So I'm just going to clamp this thing down. There's plenty of marks on here already from the previous guy, so I don't feel too bad. Now I'm not really sure where the adjustment is, so while it's off the car, I'm going to double check just so I know that it lines up here with the front. And so to double check that, you got to take the bump rubber off, make sure it goes all the way down until you feel it lock in. And then I'm going to do one more quarter turn. That's 1 3/4. That is what Ian recommends. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and install it without the dust cover for the first few laps. Done. I got both sides done. I took it out for a ride. I didn't bring you because it was super dark, couldn't see anything. But the quality of the ride and the performance is much better. Like, I'm really happy with it. I'm already tearing into it. My perception is that the rebound is too slow. So you hit a bump, it compresses, it slowly comes up. You hit another bump, it compresses again. And next thing you know, it just keeps getting lower, lower, lower. Or if you tap the brakes, it dives down, and it just takes a little while to come back up. So I think I was a little too aggressive on the rebound settings. So I'm going to make an adjustment. I did 1 3/4 turns. I'm going to back it off to 1 1/2 turns, maybe even a little bit less. And then to make an adjustment, you got to take this nut all the way off, and you got to push the strut down back through the hole. I'm going to push down and turn it. Push and turn. And 1/2. And then I'm going to back it off just like a few degrees.
so it's less than 1.5. All right, this time you're coming with me. Let's check it out after we change the settings. Cold start. I'm driving on some of the exact same roads. That was one of the big dips right there. These are the exact same roads, you guys, and it's really much improved. That's 4th gear. Before it was a lot more jittery. Not bad, much better. Still pretty firm. Here's some of the bumps we're running over. Some big ones right there. There's another one of the big bumps. Couldn't hit this one at speed because the light was red. Yeah, one of the things about a soft suspension is like, oh, it's going to be lazy when you steer and it's going to reduce the responsiveness. So I'm going about 40 miles an hour right now and the steering feel still seems really good. The turn in is always really good, but I can waggle it around a lot. The steering feels great. Honestly, I don't think the soft suspension ruins the steering at all. Okay, one of the thoughts about suspension is that the stiffer the better, and you're going to get more grip and better lap times or whatever the case. And I don't know that that's true, at least for my driving ability. Basically, if your car is understeering or if it's losing grip in the front, the first thing you do is you soften the front. You do something like either soften the roll bar in the front or the anti-roll bar. You'll soften the springs if you can, or the torsion bars, or you'll soften the shock settings. And that softer suspension will gain more grip on that end. So to say that stiff suspension is the only way to go is I don't think it's true. You know, look at these guys on the track and look how much fun they're having. I don't see firm suspension on these early 911s. And this is not vintage footage. This is racing that occurred just a few years ago. You know, the proponents of stiff suspension say that you really don't want the suspension to get out of a certain movement range because then you lose your alignment specs. And so I do agree with that. I think the suspension needs to be adjusted so it's in a sweet spot, so it can tolerate some bumps as you go over and it doesn't just start steering. What happens when you lower your car, it actually makes the roll even worse. And so you kind of end up getting out of the sweet spot, and then you're like, well, I'll just fix it with stiffer suspension so the suspension can't move. And if it doesn't move, then you just end up with a ride that's too stiff. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. Now, if there's anything I don't like about the Koni, it's that there's really limited travel in the compression. There's about a little bit less than an inch of travel before it starts to touch the bump stop. The bump stop, you know, squeezes pretty easy in the first, I don't know, half inch or so, but then you really start to feel it. If you hit a bump hard, you can feel the bump stops. And so I wish they were designed for cars at this ride height, but they just aren't. So the only way to really modify that, and I think there's other benefits in doing it too, but it's to raise the spindle. And I'll be doing that. It's a little difficult to do with the Boge struts, but you know, to use the Konis, it's all interrelated, a little tricky, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For right now, I'm extremely happy with the way it's performing. Hopefully this review of the different styles of shocks is helpful to you. I will do more pacing on this car, put it through its paces to really determine, you know, how it behaves on the track. If the shocks ever do get too faded or loosen up over time, we will see. So I'll keep you guys updated. Thanks for being here. Cheers.